Good morning, everyone. Let's do some prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhur Tat Savitravarenyam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat, Asto Ma Satgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityorma Mritam Gamya. Om Sahna Bhavtu, Sahna Bhunaktu, सह वीर्यं कर्वावहि तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहि. ओम शांति शांति शांति. Om. Let's open our Brihadaranyaka Upanishad book. We are learning about the waking state, the dream state, the deep sleep state, and the Turiya state also. So scriptures say that there is a similarity between deep sleep and the state of liberation called Turiya. In fact, that there is no experience of objectivity in both. They are the opposite poles actually. Because there's an ignorance in the deep sleep, and Turiya is free of all trace of ignorance. It may be said that in liberation, one is in full awareness of the absence of duality. Because if there is an awareness of something which is absence of duality, then after that creeps the triad of the knower, knowledge, and known. That means who is aware of, what is awareness, and the object of awareness. So that's why this deep sleep cannot be equal to state of liberation. So in these verses, where we are going to start our class today, something which we learned in Bhagavad Gita, this Rishi Yagyavalkya is going into. But through these verses, he is taking our attention to the self, who we are. Mantra 23 to 30, we will see that how beautifully he is explaining that while one does not see anything, he sees everything. So also with the functions of other organs such as hearing, tasting, thinking, knowing, etc. Here the words seeing, hearing, etc. have a peculiar spiritual connotation also. Seeing, he sees not. His seeing is a single comprehension. Because his seeing is not successive seeing of objects, one after another. As ignorant do. We think that we are seeing the trees, we are seeing the ocean, we are seeing the people. His seeing is different. Anything seen by him is a part of him. The seer. That's why he's called the seer. In that sense, there is no seen separate from the seer. In other words, the self or the seer, being pure consciousness, cannot be oblivious of itself. So that's why Upanishad says, he sees. His seeing is not a verb with a separate subject and object, or an action with a separate actor, instruments of action, and result of action. So that's why he's always the seer. In fact, there is a merger of seer, seen, and seeing into one. That's why it's called non-dual. So with regard to his not seeing, we can say that to him there is nothing other than he. So he does not see. Everything is just part of him. Because the subject cannot see the subject. His seeing is a transcendental experience, an experience which transcends all phenomenal experiences. So this is what this Rishi is trying to explain it to us. There is no movement of the mind, and the eyes in his seeing. And the same thing we should understand in the other verses also. So anything outside of oneself, which is the case with the waking and dream state, then alone one is said to see another, hear another, etc. And in deep sleep, this is not the case. Because in deep sleep, there is nothing external to oneself. And this condition of the self is compared to the vast, majestic ocean also. Calm, placid, free from waves, ripples, bubbles, which arise from itself, remain in itself, and eventually subside in itself also. When the waves and ripples of duality caused by the whirlwind of delusion and ignorance subside in sleep, what is there to be seen, heard, thought of, or known? These rishis, with the help of these Upanishads, want us to experience this oneness, this non-duality. This is not something which we are just reading or trying to understand. Ultimately, all of this needs to be experienced, the oneness. So let's open our little books, Brihadaranyaka, page number 335. And this is a chapter 4, section 3, page 335, mantra number 23. Yad veh tan pashyati hi pashyan veh tan pashyati na hi drishti दृष्टेः विप्रिलोपः विष्यते विनाशितवात् न तु तद् द्वितीयमस्ति तत् अन्ये अविभक्तं यत् पश्येत्. That it does not see in that state is because, although really seeing in that state, it does not see. But there cannot be any absence of the sight of the seer, since the latter is imperishable. But there is not that second entity differentiated from it, which it can see. Because there's no two, it's only one. So this is what he's telling us. There is no contradiction over here. He is trying to explain the preceding mantra so that there is no doubt left in our mind. When we say that one does not perceive any object in the state of deep sleep, it means that one does not perceive in the usual manner through the senses and the mind. Sometimes we think this perceiving is an action. But he is not perceiving any particular object as in waking and dreaming state. Perception or awareness has no cessation in the consciousness of the seer. In other words, the eternal power of sight or knowledge is natural to the self. It is inherently embedded in that. Just like a heat and light are natural to fire and sun. The seer and the sight are identical, and the soul needs no intercession of any other agent. So in the state of profound sleep, there is nothing else but the self, which you can call pure consciousness. It has been declared that duality exists in waking state and dream state. But in deep sleep, it is engulfed in ignorance. It is also said that the individual self merges in the supreme self in deep sleep. There is no contradiction in the self between its eternal nature of seeing or perceiving objects and non-perception of particular objects by the eyes in the state of deep sleep. So the same way, there's no contradiction between its eternal nature of awareness and non-perception of individual objects of other senses. And this is explained in the next several verses. Senses of smell, taste, speech, sound, thought, touch, and knowledge. So in these mantras, it's being amplified that 8 organs are indicative of the remaining organs also. So let's just see what he's saying with this understanding. So verse number 24, he's talking about smelling power. Yadve tan jignati jignanvehe tan jigrati na hi dratuhu prati viprit lopoho vidyate vinashitvat na tu tad dvitihamastihi tataha anya vibhaktam yat jigret. That it does not smell in that state is because although really smelling in that state, it does not smell. For there cannot be any absence of smelling on the part of the smeller, since the latter is imperishable. But there is not that second entity differentiated from it, which it can smell. So main emphasis over here is about non-duality. There's no two, it's only one. So the self does not smell any odor in the deep sleep, because while he's really smelling, he does not smell in the usual manner through the nose in deep sleep. So then this mantra says, owing to the fact of imperishability of consciousness, that means the Atma never perishes. There is no cessation of smelling of the smeller. There is no second entity other than the self, which one might smell separately. So emphasis is given into the oneness in these verses with the help of these examples of our sense organs. So now in the next one, he moves to the taste. Yadvetan rasyate, rasyanvetan rasyate, nahi rasyet, rasyatehe viprilopoho, vidyatehe avinashitvat, na tu tad dvitiyam asti, tataha anye vibhagtam yat syet. That it does not taste in that state is because although tasting in that state, it does not taste. For there cannot be any absence of tasting on the part of the taster, since the latter is imperishable, but there is not that second entity differentiated from it, which it can taste. So this is verse number 25. So self does not taste any taste. There means in deep sleep. That's what he's talking about. It is because even while he is really tasting, he does not taste in the usual manner. Because normally when we taste something, we taste through our palate. But self is imperishable. There is no cessation of tasting of the taster. There is no second entity other than the self, which one might taste separately. Now let's look at it, how he talks about the speech also. So verse number 26. Yad vehe tan vadatihi vadanve tan vadatihi na ivaktuhu vaktehe viprilopo vidyatehe avinashitvat na tu tad dvityam asti tataha anye vibhagtam yatvet. That it does not speak in that state is because although really speaking in that state, it does not speak. For there cannot be any absence of speaking on the part of the speaker, since the latter is imperishable. But there is not that second entity differentiated from it, which it can speak. So the self does not speak any speech. It is because even while he is really speaking, he does not speak there. So like in a usual manner, through the organ of our speech, we speak. And the argument he's giving over here is the fact of imperishability of the consciousness. There's never a cessation of speaking of the speaker, because there's no second entity other than the self, which one might speak of separately. Because we'll always speak to someone else. There's only one. How about the hearing? Yadvehe tan shrinoti rinvehe tan shrinoti nihishrotuhu Shrute viprilopoho vidyate avinashitvat natu tad dvityam asti tataha anye vibhagtam yat shrinuyat. That it does not hear in that state is because although really hearing in that state, it does not hear. But there cannot be any absence of hearing on the part of the hearer, since the latter is imperishable. But there is not that second entity differentiated from it, which it can hear. So the self does not hear any sound. It is because even while he is really hearing, he does not hear in the usual manner, through the ears, because of the fact of imperishability of consciousness. Because there is no cessation of hearing of the hearer. There is no second entity other than the self, which one might hear separately. So now in the next verse 28, he's talking about thinking also, not just only the sense organs, but the mind also. Yadvehe tan manutehe manvano me tan manutehe nahi man mantuhu te viprilopoho vidyate avinashitvat natu tad dvityam asti hi tataha anye vibhagtam yatam yanmaniyet. That it does not think in that state is because although really thinking in that state, it does not think. But there cannot be any absence of thinking on the part of the thinker, since the latter is imperishable. But there is not that second entity differentiated from it, which it can think. So self does not think any thought. It is because even while he is really thinking, he does not think in the usual manner through the mind. And he is explaining it. He says the fact of imperishability of consciousness. There's never a cessation of thinking by the thinker. There's no second entity other than the self, which one might think of separately. So again, remember, he's taking our attention towards that pure consciousness through these examples, which we are familiar with, all these examples. We are very much familiar with our eyes also, ears also, taste also, hearing also, thinking also. But we never pay attention to real self, which is a non-dual. So that's why it really helps. These kind of verses help us to meditate deeper on ourselves. Who are we? Because often we pay attention to just the perishable part of our personality, or even perishable part of the things which we have, the names which we have, the relationships we have, which are all perishable. So that's why these verses, this Rishi has gone through one by one, taking our attention towards that. Now let's look at, he's not done yet. In verse number 29, he's talking about touching also. Yad vehe tan saprishatihi sprishanve tan saprishati nahi Saparshtuhu saprishtahe vaprilopoho vidyate vinashitvat natu tad advitye masti tataha anye vibhagtam yat saprishet. That it does not touch in that state is because, although really touching in that state, it does not touch. For there cannot be any absence of touching on the part of the toucher. Since the latter is imperishable, there is not that second entity differentiated from it, which it can touch. There has to be two in order to touch. So this is verse number 29. The self does not touch. It is because even while he is really touching, he does not touch there in the usual manner through the organ of touch. Owing to the fact of imperishability, there is no cessation of touching of the toucher. There is no second entity other than the self, which one might touch separately. Now the next verse, verse number 30. He is talking about the knowing also. The deeper part, subtler part of our personality, knowing. Yadvehe tan vijanati vijanvehe tan vijanati na hi vigyatu vigyate viparilopoho vidyate vinashitvat natu tad dvitiyam asti tataha anye vibhagtam yad vijaniyat. That it does not know in that state is because, although knowing in that state, it does not know. But there cannot be any absence of knowing on the part of the knower, since the latter is imperishable. But there is not that second entity differentiated from it, which it can know. So the self does not know any object. He's talking about the object. It is because even while he is really knowing, he does not know in the usual manner through the intellect. See, knowing we always do through our intellect, buddhi. So the fact of imperishability of the consciousness, there's no cessation of knowing ever, because he's the knower. There is no second entity other than the self, which one might know separately. So again, it's like a oneness, non-duality. Verse number 31. Yatra vanyab id सयात तत्र अन्योः अन्ये पश्येत अन्यो अन्ये जिग्रेत अन्यो अन्ये दृश्येत अन्यो अन्ये द्वेत अन्यो अन्ये शृणुवात अन्यो अन्ये वीत अन्यो अन्ये सपृशेत अन्यो अन्ये द्विजानीयात. Where there is a different thing, as it were, there one can see another, one can smell another, one can taste another, one can speak another, one can hear another, one can think another, one can touch another, and one can know another. So this verse number 31, he is trying to summarize for us what he has said earlier in all these separate verses about separate organs. So the duality that is experienced in the two states of waking and dream is not real, he says. It's only an appearance, which is unreal and non-existent. The term "if" over here, which means as though or as it were, which that really means occurring in the mantra, in this mantra, make this point clear. Okay? So he's trying to make the point clear, which he made in the other verses, all those verses before that. Okay, making it clear that there has to be two in order to do all that. Now let's look at verse number 32. सलिल एको दृष्टः अद्वैतो भवति एष ब्रह्मलोकः सम्राट इति हैनम अनुपशासः याज्ञवल्क्यः एषस्य परमा गति एषस्य परमा संपत् एषस्य परमो लोकः एषस्य परम आनंदा एतस्य आनंदस्य अध्यानि भूतानि मात्राम उपजीवन्ति. It becomes in deep sleep, serene, like water. One, the seer and the free from duality. This is the world that is Brahma or emperor. Thus did Yajnavalkya teach Janaka. This is its highest goal. This is its highest glory. This is its highest world. This is its highest bliss. All other beings live on a particle of this very bliss. So this is verse number 32. So Jeev, in a state of profound sleep, deep sleep, is fully embraced by the self. At that point is freed of all limiting adjuncts, the upadhis, and becomes infinite, homogeneous, one without a second. And he gives the analogy of an ocean over here. And attains its natural state of non-dual consciousness by losing its individuality, which is born out of ignorance. This is the state of Brahma, he says. This is the supreme attainment, and it is natural to him. Other glories attained in the waking and dream state are not that natural for us. This is the supreme achievement because other achievements up to this state of Hiranyagarbha are within the realm of ignorance, actually, agyanta. And that's why they are called transient also. That means they are temporary. They can be taken away. But this oneness cannot be taken away because that's our real state. This state is the supreme bliss because that which is infinite alone is bliss. We will learn that in Śākalya Upanishad. There are beautiful mantras about that. And this state has been proved to be infinite, freed of all kinds of limitations, upadhis. All other joys which we feel in the waking state or even in the dream state are dependent upon contact with sense objects. They are finite, and that's why they are subject to change and also destruction. This infinite bliss is eternal, and it's transcendental. Even the happiness which is enjoyed through the contact of the senses with their objects by all beings who have not attained the state of Brahma is merely a very small fraction of the bliss of Brahma. And we'll see that Rishi Yagyavalkya giving the explanation of that to us. So Yagyavalkya is leading King Janak step by step to the full conviction of the real non-dual nature of the individual who is nothing but Brahma. You can call it a Brahm, you can call it a source, the substratum, the cause of all cognition or all experiences. This is a different way to explain the same absolute. But in the scriptures, we see the term Brahm used for that. Brahm. Next verse is verse number 33. A rather long verse. If you really challenge yourself, try to memorize this verse. स यो मनुष्याणां राधः समृद्धो भवति अन्य मे अधिपतिः सर्वे मनुष्यं भोगे संपन्नमा स मनुष्याणां परमानन्दा अथ ये शतं मनुष्याणाम् आनन्दः स एकः पितॄणां जितलोकः आनन्दः अथ ये शतं पितॄणां जितलोकानाम् आनन्दः स एको गन्धर्वलोकानन्दः अथ ये शतं गन्धर्वलोकानन्दः स एकः कर्म देवानाम् आनन्दः ये कर्मणः देवतम् अभिसंपद्यन्ते अथ ये शतं कर्म देवानाम् आनन्दः स एक अजान देवानाम् आनन्दः यच्च श्रोत्रियोः अवृजिनोः अकामहतः अथ ये शतं जान देवानाम् आनन्दः स एकः प्रजापति लोक आनन्दः यच्च श्रोत्रियोः जिनोः अकामहता अथ ये शतं प्रजापति लोक आनन्दा स एको ब्रह्म लोक आनन्दा यच्च श्रोत्रियोः अवजिनोः एक अकामहता अथ एष एव परम आनन्दा एष ब्रह्म लोकः सम्राट इति हि उवाच याज्ञवल्क्यः सो अहं भगवते सहस्रं ददामि अत उदर्वं विमोक्ष एव ब्रूहीतिः अत्र याज्ञवल्क्यो विभयाचकार मेधावी राजा सर्वेभ्यो मान्तेभ्य उदर उत्सी इति He who among men is physically perfect, opulent, the lord of others, and most endowed with all human enjoyments, represents the maximum joy of man. So that means through all this, a person can enjoy life. 100 measures of joy for men equal 1 measure of joy for the mains who have won their world, Pitri Lok. So anybody who has done a good karam, go to Pitri Lok, and they can enjoy 100 times more than that person who is enjoying over here with all kinds of opulence, good health, good relationships. 100 measures of joy for the mains who have won their world equal 1 measure of the joy in the world of the celestials, minstrels. 100 measures of joy in the world of the celestials, minstrels, equal 1 measure of the joy for the gods through action, those who attain Godhead through their actions. That means the Devtas. 100 measures of joy for the gods through action equal 1 measure of the joy for the gods by birth. as also for one who is erudite in Vedas, taintless and unaffected by desire. 100 measures of joy for the gods by birth equal 1 measure of joy in the world of Prajapati, Virat, as also as one who is erudite in the Vedas, taintless and unaffected by desire. 100 measures of joy in the world of Prajapati equal 1 measure of joy in the world of Hiranyagarbha, as also for one who is erudite in Vedas, taintless and unaffected by desire. Hereafter, this indeed is the supreme bliss. This is the world that is Brahma or Emperor, said Yajnavalkya. I give you 1,000 cows. Venerable sir, kindly tell me beyond this about liberation itself. At this, Yajnavalkya was afraid, thinking the intelligent emperor would press me for all conclusions of his questions. So over here in this rather long mantra, we have a gradation of joy experienced in the phenomenal world. The unknown should be approached through the known. Sense pleasure is familiar to everyone. That's why it starts from there. It must be possible for us to conceive the supreme bliss of Brahm by intellect as the farthest imaginable limit or the climax of human joy, multiplied by infinitely both quantitatively and qualitatively. But all this intellectual comprehension cannot even touch the borderland of real bliss of Brahman, which is to be experienced by ourselves. In fact, this is, we need to identify with our own self. It's right here. You don't have to go anywhere. This level of bliss can be experienced right here, living in this body. This is what Rishi Yajnavalkya is saying. There is no higher or lower degree in the supreme bliss of Brahma. It is only in the sensual pleasures generated by meritorious karmas. There are higher and lower degrees. Nobody can say that ultimate bliss I have to this degree. No, it's the same. When knowledge is veiled by ignorance, when the veil of ignorance becomes thicker and thicker, the bliss of Brahm becomes more and more distorted. It gets reflected, it gets refracted through the intellect in the form of sense pleasures. And that's when we think that there are various degrees of bliss experienced by the devatas, the celestials, according to their karmas. The joy of a person who's physically and mentally healthy and abundantly rich among human beings, who could be the Lord or the leader of others, can have all the human enjoyments. Rishi Yajnavalkya is saying that the joy, if you measure it, it's only one unit. Because that's how he's giving us the degrees, different degrees of joy. Even this lowest unit is not actually enjoyed by anyone actually, as a human being. It's only a conceptual idea. The scale of degrees of happiness runs like this. In this verse, if you want to read it properly, human beings then conqueror of the world of mains, the Pitri Lok. Then after that, he talked about Gandharvas, then Karam Devatas, who have gained divinity through actions, and then there are Devatas who are by birth Devatas also. Prajapati. And then he talks about Hiranyagarbha, the Brahma. So it's like a ascending scale, each succeeding one attains 100-fold more joy than the preceding one. This is what Rishi is telling us. But then a person who is a Vedic scholar, who is sinless, desireless also, no desires, enjoys all the joy experienced by all, even above this. And his joy increases in proportion to the decrease of his sin and desire. So fewer the desires, higher the joy, till the bliss of Brahma. That is like a culminating point reached by that person. So we can measure that because it's a relative condition. But the bliss of Brahma transcends even that. You cannot put any kind of a measure on that. So that's why this mantra says that King Janak, pursuing the subject, prayed for further instructions from Yagyavalkya. And then Rishi Yagyavalkya got startled a little, because he knew that knowledge which King Janak is demanding can be imparted to only the most qualified student, or aspirant, I should say. Because this reality is beyond the phenomenal reality. This sage was not lacking in this knowledge. In fact, he had great appreciation for the purified intellect of the king, because king had almost bound him for imparting to him all the knowledge he had through the boon of freedom to ask any number of questions of his choice. That's what we saw in the earlier conversations. Because Rishi Yagyavalkya granted that boon to King Janak himself. So that's why King Janak is asking these questions. We all want happiness. King Janak had all the happiness of this world. In fact, he was a karma yogi also, but he wanted to go beyond the karma yoga. And this is what we are learning over here. How to go beyond and what kind of a practice we need to do. So we'll start with verse number 34 next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much for listening.